along going out on a limb to protect my Zoomers and Gen Alpha peeps. I just wanted to talk about the hypocrisy we see on our internet, especially against the younger gens, saying that we are the most cooked generation. In fairness, I'm not going to lie, we are cooked. As a Zoomer myself, I can understand why older generations have given up on us. We have to admit that there was a lot of hypocrisy involved from all sides when talking, especially coming from the old gen who get caught up in this dumbass argument. Now, I won't be the one to talk about which side is better or which time is better. Of course, I can't comment on life before I was born. I'll bring in some examples though, but I will talk about some instances from old generations being stupid and just talk about the one thing we all have in common when it comes to commenting about generational hate that often tends to be heavily skewed or misguided. First thing we talk about is the psychological phenomenon which causes people to hate just as the cause of older generations acting the way they do. You ever hear your old man or just an older relative talk about how our generation sucks because we aren't hunting and gathering like the old days?
We finna ape.
Nah, I'm just kidding. But on a serious note, we've all had that talk with old people, and they bring up how times were much simpler and we don't have all this bullshit destroying our lives. Now, one cause of this could be memory bias, or even nostalgia when people try to remember the good times or the hard times, which always tends to be a bit more personalized when we actually think about it. In fact, a lot of selective memory might be the cause of this just due to misremembering details and only remembering things that help them fuel this bias. In the end, this would be a seemingly endless fight because he would use an example of a spoiled kid, now in comparison to back then when kids had manners. But spoiled kids have existed at many points in time and are aware of the different changes that have happened over the years. Like, consider this. People believe that the internet is the most dangerous thing to exist, and to be fair, that is true. I have to admit that there are so many horror stories of things that have happened on the web, but we aren't going to act like letting kids go outside in the street, leaving them unattended, isn't unsafe either, especially with a lot of potential dangerous things outside. Sure, safety is a thing you have to teach a kid when dealing with both situations, but the things that we have to consider is that the times are different. To this day, we still teach stranger danger and what to do when you are in actual danger. These kinds of teaching still prevail, but we have to remember that different times come with different problems. Sure, leaving a kid to learn to be out on the streets is not the same as dealing with people on the internet. Both sides have their own set of catastrophes waiting to happen, but they are different. One side isn't exclusively worse than the other. Sure, some situations are more difficult to handle, but that doesn't invalidate a problem. Part of the problem that persists is a lack of open-minded thinking without fail. Each generation thinks that the new generation is full of incompetent people as opposed to themselves. Yet they don't seem to remember that they are significantly older and wiser than the others. Concepts like sacrifice and duty are things that we learn as we age and adapt into ourselves, but that comes with time. Look, a 40-year-old adult who has worked for more than 10 years with higher education and more stable finances is going to easily outclass most of the 20-year-olds. It's not a hard topic to understand because younger people bring in brighter ideas and are more flexible when learning, but with that, it takes time. A lot of old people seem to be uncharitable to a lot of younger people and tend to compare memories of their younger selves with other younger people and overly criticize them for it. Sure, the experiences are different, but it's not fair to compare a memory to things in the present, because the memory of someone tends to be unreliable due to precognitive biases or misremembering key details when recalling events. Sure, the difference between an expert on the field and a new employee is night and day. Instead of having that understanding, the more experienced employee is going to be annoyed because of said perceived incompetence. One thing older generations tend to do is view things through a lens of themselves in the present with experience, wisdom, and hindsight already being there. Soon, they start applying these same standards to the younger guy. Even if they were even worse when they first started their job, they don't remember this because they are under the assumption that the problem isn't the learning curve, but the new guy. According to them, they don't remember the things being that hard or having it even harder back then. It can be to great effect to think about millennials who got shit on for being some of the laziest and most sensitive generation, when in reality times have changed. A common thing to note is the social norms shifted during this point due to factors such as culture and things like the political and economical landscape which has made them the people they are. Technology advanced during the early 2000s, which affected both millennials and Gen Z, which was the start of a big shift in culture and interest in things like video games, computers, the internet, and many more, which would fill our childhood and early teen years. With this, we have developed more efficient ways to do our day-to-day tasks, such as a calculator to help us remove any unnecessary math, or algorithms, which are both time-consuming and difficult, as well as having access to Google, which is by far the biggest advancement in human history. All the knowledge at our fingertips and without the need to go to a library or go through other means. This advancement didn't inherently breed complacency, it just changed the way we work. This was a big shift in cultural norms which made things easier. We have phones that do almost anything instead of traditional means. Like, why go to my friend's house to play games when I can just text them and tell them we will play from our own homes?
What you banging, short?
You see, not much would change. Sure, it's not the same, but it's possible. Why go through the trouble of going to a library to find answers, and in many cases, books can be found online, so there's no need to go to a library. With Amazon, we can skip out on going to the store physically. You get the point here. A lot of this misunderstanding comes with a lot of older people just viewing us in a very unfavorable light, which muddles the water for any valid arguments we might have. Older people have had a bad habit of romanticizing the past. A lot of my older family members tell me to appreciate cars because back home, they had to walk miles to get to school and work harder when they were kids because they had to. People of all ages have a sense of entitlement and ego, and view themselves as better than the past, and the present is only getting worse. We all are lazy, uninspired, and self-centered in a way. Somehow, the newer generation failed because they had these terrible characteristics that we totally don't have. It's just a continuing circle where each generation punches down on the previous one. Look at the way Zoomers are getting the same flack millennials are facing. Word for word, bar for bar, both millennials and Zoomers have faced this same criticism from previous generations. Gen Alpha is getting flack for watching brain rot when YouTube poops, shitposting, and dank memes before weren't as brain dead and stupid. I want to go out on a limb here and say that Vine would have been what current TikTok is if they were still around.
This kid's definitely on crack right now.
And sure, some of the old classics are fun to watch, but let's not act like any of this is peak comedy. Both are dumb and kinda cringe, but they are just mindless fun. We can't act like one is better than the other. It's subjective. Now the headlines are not targeted towards them anymore because they've suffered enough, but the Zoomers, on the other hand, yeah, they don't get the same charity. The critique has been the same. Bar for bar, millennials are lazy, Gen Z is spoiled rotten, and Gen Alpha has brain rot due to them being glued to their electronics. Each time the goalpost shifts to the newer generation, and they become the target of criticism for the next 5 to 8 years until there is a new generation. If you went back in time, you can see each generation shitting on each other, and boomers got a lot of shit for rebelling against strict parenting that would hinge on tough love, harsh discipline, and picking yourself up by your bootstraps. One thing to note is that the baby boom happened at the end of the Second World War and would go on to 1964, so technically the baby boom era consists of 2 generations stacked into one. So they technically grew up around different times, such as the prospering economy right after the war, but over time, within the next 10 to 15 years, a lot had happened, such as the Cold War and many other social movements, which would throw the second half of the baby boomers into an uncertain environment that was constantly changing. The baby boom era was split down the middle, meanwhile one side would follow strict rules and the others would follow a lot of changes to everyday life. So there was a level of uncertainty which would be pushed onto the next generations. Gen X would get a lot of flack for the cynicism, as well as being just overall less optimistic and highly jaded. They were taught to be independent and would often strive for having autonomy over themselves, and was a big turning point where dual income households were the norm due to women becoming more educated and playing a more pivotal role in the workforce. So, the ability to provide for yourself became apparent, and this would start to cause a huge shift towards self-fulfilling goals. Actually, just to prove my point on people calling out younger generations for the perceived entitlement, we have this article which explains how each generation has had their critiques of a younger generation, citing that nobody wants to work anymore. Current millennials and Zoomers are experiencing, so I don't blame them for being the way they are. Most of the younger generation is getting there. Each generation has had a negative stereotype tied to them. Both millennials and Zoomers have been called snowflakes, self-absorbed, and entitled. A lot of our current gen are more conscious of mental health, as well as being more willing to question authority and stand up for themselves. It's not that young people don't want to work, it's that people want to work for livable wages and without the need to sacrifice everything to a company who can literally ruin your life at the drop of a hat. Each and every generation has had their time to shine and make changes, and part of it comes with wanting a better life for themselves. Even with the struggles, there is some hope in the dark. The world is still as unfair as it's always been, but there is still a chance. With the current issues going on with our government and economy, we're facing some of the harshest economic times in general, which are unheard of. This does give us a perspective on how older generations think, but the constant criticism isn't lost on the young folks. A lot of young people have fought back against their unfair treatment and uncalled for advice. We have memes made specifically making fun of them, as well as often making trends on social media that directly oppose these social norms. Take company loyalty. In the last decade, with information being readily available, it becomes harder to spin narratives for people to just mindlessly believe bullshit. As a collective, people have been able to see through lies, and now the internet has become a very powerful tool for people to speak freely and actually strive for social changes. We quit quitting as a way to go against unfair work conditions, and we have social media to discuss hot topics, especially when it comes to social issues. With the recent trial of Luigi Mangione, people have become more vocal about the unfair practices from the medical industry that often preys on the poor, and the support for his trial is crazy. More than $500,000 has been contributed to pay for his trial, and the amount of pushback that companies have had for younger people is crazy. A lot of millennials and Gen Z have grown up in a time where you had to be flexible and able to adapt to changes. With the increasingly fast pace of the internet and the increasing options for work, in time it was bound to happen where the old ways would be put into question. Company loyalty doesn't mean anything to the younger gen because what's stopping them from firing us at the drop of a hat? Times have changed and so have people with the ever-changing landscape of the world. A lot of this unfair criticism comes from two sources: ignorance and the fear of change. As time progresses, things change and it doesn't get any easier. People pray for an easier time in a world that just gets more and more advanced. And people can only look back when the times were good and simpler. There is a lot of nuance and perspective that needs to be considered, and a lot of the time, those who speak on the other generations tend to not have a connection with them, so they start assuming things. Sure, all generations have a few bad apples, but those bad apples don't speak for everyone. That's one of the key things I wanted to point out, since it has been a struggle for me when older people don't understand me. But at the same time, I realize that I also don't understand them, and I fall into the same cycle of hateful thinking, and it just speaks on my ignorance. I personally think that we've all had our fair share of struggles and our own set of problems, but that doesn't invalidate others. Being different doesn't mean weakness, and a lot of the time, the lack of connection is the thing that gives birth to these new ideas. What do you think? Leave a like, comment, and subscribe.